This is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and today I'd like to talk to Catholic parents who would like to provide their children with an elite Catholic education. This education, this elite Catholic education, is not available in any schools. There's nowhere you can send your children to receive this elite Catholic education. The only place that it's available is actually in your own home. That's what's funny about the 21st century. Our children have access to resources and services in their own homes that they don't have access to in the best private schools that they can find. If we consider the costs of private schooling, strip away all of the non-essential activities of the schools and services and resources, the facilities, the faculty, strip away all of the extras of a private school education, and look at the core curriculum, the actual academic program of a private school, whether that's a secular private school or a Catholic private school. If we look at the actual curriculum plan, we'll find that it actually offers very little. It's an average college preparatory education. And the key word there is average. It's average. The reason why it has to be average because it needs to serve a number of students whose tuition will cover the costs of the operation of the school itself. The financial demands of the modern school model limit what the school can actually do. If the school wants to run this massive facility with this large faculty of teachers and counselors and custodians and staff members, there's a certain revenue that's needed, and there's only one way to get that revenue, and it's to divide it among the largest number of students that the facility can hold. And so schools are constantly limited by their revenue needs. And this limitation requires them to always offer an average program. This is what we see in modern business. If we go to Walmart, Walmart's business model is to make billions of dollars selling average products to average people. Because the average people make up the bulk of the population of consumers. There are far more average people in society than there are special people looking for some special product or some special service. The largest and most influential companies are going to target the average people because they're the only companies that can afford to serve the average people. And the business model that we see at Amazon.com or at Walmart or at any other large retail store is to make a tiny bit of profit on a great number of sales or products. They serve average products and average services to average people. That's how big business works, and that's how big education works. And when I say big education, I don't just mean public schools. I mean any school that's arranged on the K-12 school model. As soon as we say we're going to offer a K-12 education in a school building, there's going to be 13 grade levels in a school building or in several school buildings, we immediately have great demands for revenue because the operating expenses of the K-12 model are very great. I would say they're unsustainable. Those revenue demands of the K-12 model immediately require a certain number of students paying a certain tuition. And these can't be the richest of the rich, so we can't have an extraordinarily high tuition. We can't charge $40,000 per year for day school tuition at the local private school. Schools have to find a way to lower the tuition into a range where an average working family can afford to send a student to the school. And then they have to try to reach as many families as possible and find a balance between the facilities that they can build and manage, the faculty that they can pay, and the student body that they can serve. This is big education. It works the same way Amazon and Walmart work. They try to provide more for less. But what they end up offering is an average program for average students, and they can't offer anything more. If they try to offer something more, they will immediately begin to divide their student body. And as soon as they begin to divide the student body, they will either have to raise tuition or they will simply not be able to afford operating the school with fewer students. So they have to keep as many students as possible. And the only way to do that is to round off all the corners or round off all the edges of the curriculum so that no one is offended, no one is divided, and the student body can be as large as it needs to be. They offer a vanilla or average or smooth-cornered program to serve the number of students that are necessary to pay the tuition. This is why we see changes take place in schools over time, why a school may have started 50 years ago as a boys' school, and now all of a sudden we find that it's changed to become a co-ed school. It's not that the school suddenly had a change of philosophy and they said, you know what, I think it would be better academically if we had girls and boys at the school. No one ever says that when these changes are made. What happens is the school's ability to reach the number of families or serve the number of families that are needed to pay the bills no longer works, and the solution is to take away one of the restrictions, which is that it's an all-boys school. So they open it up to boys and girls and fill the school to get the tuition that they need. We see schools do the same thing where they begin to let in students who don't even come from families that practice the religion of the school. We find Catholic schools with students in the schools that aren't even Catholics, not because they're seeking to become Catholics, but because these families are seeking an education that may be better than the public schools make available, and the school is looking for tuition. And once these students are admitted to the school has to continue smoothing off the edges so that the student body can be kept intact to pay the bills. Now, this is really not a criticism. I know some will say, oh, you're criticizing the private schools. I'm not. The private schools, the word private in private schools has to do with business. Schools are businesses. The public school is something different because the public school has no choice but to serve everyone with an average program because it's funded by the government and has to be democratic. It has to be diverse. It has to be multicultural because it's funded by American tax money. When we move from the public school to the private school, we assume that a private school has a specific mission that they're serving, and that's why they've chosen to create a private school, to gain the freedom to not have to serve the democratic public, but to be able to serve a group of people within that population who share certain values. The problem is that if we make that group too specific, we don't have enough students to pay for the school to operate. And this is especially the problem when modern school administrators and school boards immediately go to a K-12 model that they're not going to be able to afford. And what happens over time is the original mission of the school, with all of its sharp edges, is continually smoothed off until finally it's a soft, friendly ball that just about anyone can handle. That's what happens and causes a decline in all K-12 schools. So the private schools, whether they're secular or Christian or Catholic, they will always degenerate and lose their distinguishing qualities that originally separated them and caused them to feel the need to establish a private school in the first place. The cost of the school will simply require that the requirements of the student body, the qualifications of the student body, are continually eased and relaxed, and more students are allowed in that initially would not have been allowed in. In many places, there aren't even enough students who meet the qualifications in a geographical area to make the school possible, and the schools just simply open their doors to more and more students. Recently in Tennessee, an all-girls private school just decided to let transgender students into the school. So if a boy is willing to identify as a girl, he's welcome at the all-girls private school. This is why these schools do these things. It's not because they have some kind of true moral concern or social ambition to reach out to these students from outside the actual community they serve. It's because they have no other choice. They have no other choice. And this is the great fault of K-12 education and why it always degenerates. So the private schools, whether they charge $5,000 a year or $50,000 a year, will all degenerate over time as long as they are using the K-12 model, because it creates such great overhead for the school, creates so much financial pressure on the school, and there's only one way to serve that financial pressure, and it's to constantly smooth off the edges. If you want to give your children an elite Catholic education, there's only one way to do it. And the good news, like I said, is that it's available in your home. You don't have to go anywhere for it. You don't have to send your children anywhere for it. It's available in your home. And this is true in two different ways. First of all, it's available in your home if you're a homeschooling family and simply study remotely. You can study in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy using our online study program and enjoy an elite Catholic education in your own home. If you live in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, you can enjoy an elite Catholic education in your own home with an in-home private tutor. And that tutor would be me, myself. When you consider the cost of private school attendance, like I said, this can be anywhere from $5,000 a year at a cheap, usually Protestant private school, all the way up to $50,000 at a private boarding school, probably even higher than that today. No matter how much you pay for that private education, it is going to be an average education. It's going to offer many, many so-called benefits that have nothing to do with the actual academic program. They'll try to sell all kinds of extras and add-ons to make the tuition look attractive. But none of these things have anything to do with the actual academic program offered to the children. And our primary concern in education is the academic formation, the academic content, the quality of the intellectual formation. That's the most important concern we should have when we talk about education. We don't need a school to provide sacraments for our children. The sacraments are freely available in our local parish. We don't need a school to provide sports and extracurricular activities for our children because those things have nothing to do with school. Our children can enjoy participation in sports and extracurricular activities through private organizations all around our home. We can enroll our children in dance classes, music classes, local private sports teams. Anything that's available at a private school is already available privately in the community. There's no reason to associate those activities with school or use them as an excuse to charge private school tuition for an average education. When we consider schooling, we should consider the academic program. We should consider the intellectual formation that the school offers, not the social life, because that's a myth, not the extracurricular activities, not the sacramental activities at a Catholic school. Those are already available. What we should consider is the actual intellectual formation, the actual academic program, and whether the academic program puts our children on a course that can lead them to wisdom, not just to a high school diploma, not just to college admission, but a path that actually leads them to wisdom. Or can, I should say, that can lead them to wisdom. That's what we should be asking. And I'm not talking to parents who are themselves interested only in average education or who are anxious about college admission and anxious about jobs and anxious about a high school diploma. That anxiety will always ruin education. It's not how the world works. It's not how life works. Parents who are interested in giving their children the best possible education will seek the counsel of the wise men and saints who lived throughout history. They'll ask the question, what do the great philosophers suggest we should teach our children? What do the doctors of the church suggest we should teach our children? When the saints had children, what did they teach their children? These are the questions that we should ask. And when we ask those questions, we'll find very clear answers from history. We'll find very clear answers because the educational program that was developed by history's wise men, that was taught in schools by saints and doctors of the church, is known to us. It's the classical liberal arts curriculum. It's not a mystery. It's the classical liberal arts curriculum. The problem with the classical liberal arts curriculum today is that it cannot be offered in the K-12 model. It doesn't fit into the box that's been created by this desire for big schools. Schools cannot offer the classical liberal arts because they require master teachers. And these master teachers they have always been and always will be very few. And so a school can't have a plan to have 50 teachers on staff because there aren't 50 master teachers in any geographical area. They might be lucky if there's one. And so the school model that demands 20 or 30 or 150 teachers is never going to have master teachers on its staff. The classical liberal arts, because they require master teachers, cannot be taught in modern schools. They cannot be taught in a K-12 school. So the educational program that was developed and taught by the wise men and saints in history cannot work in a modern K-12 school. And it doesn't matter whether it's a public school or a private school. It cannot work in the K-12 school model. And so the schools choose to abandon the classical liberal arts and maintain the K-12 model, and that's why education is what it is today. If you would like to give your children a classical liberal arts education, you have to do so privately. And as I said, there's two ways to do this. You can do this as a homeschooling family, studying our program online, or you can arrange for private tutoring in your own home if you live in the Charlotte area. The costs are a fraction of what the private school will cost. You can provide your children with an elite Catholic education for a fraction of the cost of private schooling. Because again, when you're paying a private school tuition, you're not paying for an academic program. You're paying for that whole big school program, the facilities, the faculty, the buses, the custodians, the sporting events and activities. You're paying for that whole mess of activities and resources and facilities and staff members, on and on and on. All of that is covered by your tuition. Whereas really, your tuition should be paying for an education, for academic instruction, for intellectual formation. That's what your tuition should be paying for. And if you limit your tuition to academic instruction, you can enjoy far better academic instruction for a fraction of the cost, even if you are paying for private tutoring in your own home. And so if you would like elite Catholic education for your children, the best possible Catholic education for your children. And when I talk about education, I'm talking about their actual academic formation. The best possible Catholic education is the classical liberal arts, and they are only available privately. When you go back through history, if you were to go back and study the lives of saints like Thomas More, who was actually a father with children, you will find that these saints did not send their children to schools, but arranged for private tutoring. And the private tutoring was brought in for the specific purpose of providing classical liberal arts instruction to the children. That's what education meant. The K-12 model was invented by the American public school system in the 1850s. There was never a K-12 school at any time in church history. It's never how education worked, and the reason why is what we see in modern society. It's impossible to provide an excellent education to a large number of students. Inexplicably, the Catholic schools and other private schools have chosen to follow the public schools and copy their model, even though they don't have access to government funding. And this leaves them strapped for cash, always. And this is why in a Catholic school, for example, and again, I don't mean to be critical, but this is a fact. In the Catholic schools, we find what basically amounts to a public school education with a private school tuition. And that really is not sustainable. If you'd like to give your children an elite Catholic education, what they need is a classical liberal arts education. They need to study the classical languages. They need to study the arts of grammar, reasoning, and rhetoric. They need to study classical mathematics, classical arithmetic, classical geometry, classical music and astronomy, as these 7 arts, these 7 classical liberal arts, prepare them for the study of true philosophy. And without these classical liberal arts studies, they will not be able to advance in true philosophy. And that's why, throughout history, children were taught the 7 classical liberal arts. Your children need to be introduced to classical philosophy, not just any philosophy, but true philosophy. They need to be introduced to the writings of Aristotle. They need to be introduced to the writings of Cicero and Seneca and other true philosophers. They also need to study Catholic theology. They need to study the sacred scriptures. These aren't taught in private schools. They need to study the Catechism of the Catholic Church. They can study the Summa Theologica of St. Thomas Aquinas. These subjects are not available in private schools. Why? Because they're of interest to only a few elite students, and the schools can't build themselves to serve the elite students because the bills wouldn't be paid. Your children can enjoy that elite education because as a parent, you're not responsible to offer an average program to a large number of average students. You can give your children an elite education, and the choice of an education is a right that you have as a parent. It's why our country allows homeschooling to begin with, and it's why the Catholic Church teaches that parents always have a right to choose for their children an education that serves the parents' convictions and goals. You have the right to provide your children with an elite education. You have no obligation to send your children to the local school to help pay the bills for that school. That's not your responsibility. You have no obligation to send your children to the local public school to try to evangelize the school community. That is not your responsibility, certainly not your children's responsibility. You have the right to give your children the best possible education. And the only way to do that is to teach your children the classical liberal arts, classical philosophy, and scholastic Catholic theology. And that education is only available in your own home for your children. Now, in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, we offer a number of different options. As I said, if you live in the Charlotte area, I am happy to come and teach your children directly as a private tutor in your own home. That's one option. Another option, if you're a homeschool family anywhere, you can enroll in our online program. If finances are limited for you, you can enroll in our basic student plan. It costs only $25 per month, affordable for anyone, and provides all of the basic needs that your children will have for study with your help as a parent. In addition to this, I offer live video-based tutoring for students, which is available affordably for students anywhere in the world. I have students all over the world who I meet with for tutoring. It's available right in your own home. Expert classical liberal arts instruction, private tutoring in your own home, either in person, if you'd like to have in-person tutoring in the Charlotte area, or remote tutoring by means of Zoom or Google Meet or some other video conferencing software. These tutoring sessions are very effective. I think most parents can't even imagine how effective tutoring is and how unnecessary all of the hubbub and costs and distractions of modern schooling actually are. Education is very simple, but not in a modern school environment. If you're interested in giving your children an elite Catholic education, there's only one place to get it. There's only one place where your children can study the same subjects from the same books that wise men and saints studied all through history. And it's in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. Now you may be wondering, but what about modern requirements? What about high school diploma? What about college admission? What about preparing for careers? What about modern subjects like math and science? It's all available. It's no problem. There's no need to worry about these things. Modern studies are very, very simple. If you look again at what the modern schools actually offer in terms of academic content, strip away all of the bells and whistles and just look at the academic content that's required for a high school diploma, you'll find it's actually a very simple course of study. There's no explanation for why students are devoting their whole school careers for the requirements of a high school diploma. When you actually boil away all of the extra stuff that the schools are doing and get down to the real requirements of the diploma, it is a very light task. And there's no reason why that should distract us from real classical Catholic studies. So we can take care of modern studies, that's no problem. But there's no explanation for why our children should be focused on modern studies when so little is actually required. In fact, most schools end up doing far more than is required only to serve a high school diploma. They don't do more in terms of adding higher studies or richer subjects. They simply add more busy work and activity to the high school diploma program. And it's a giant waste of time. So if you'd like to give your children an elite Catholic education, don't send them to a private school. Don't be distracted by the high tuition at a certain school or the attempt of the school to make itself look impressive. You can put uniforms on students and make boys wear ties, and you can decorate the buildings of the school, but none of that is affecting the academic instruction of the school. And that's what parents should be looking for. Don't allow the schools to deceive you by all of the appearances, all the bells and whistles. Look at the academic program of the school and ask, is this academic program worth the money? Don't be deceived by talk about college admission. Kids from the local public school are admitted into colleges. No one needs to go to a private school for college admission. Look at the academic program and ask yourself as a parent, is this the best possible academic program? And the answer will be no. It's not the best academic program. It is an average program intended for average students to maintain a large student body, to provide the revenue that covers the great costs of running a K-12 school. If you want elite Catholic education for your children, they need a classical liberal arts education, and that is only available in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. An elite Catholic education, an education that is the same as that which was developed and enjoyed by wise men and saints through history, is only available in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. That's a bold claim for me to make, but it's the truth. And you can search it out for yourself. I invite you to visit the Academy website at classicalliberarts.com. On the top menu of the site, you'll find links to a page that describes the curriculum, that talks about all of the different enrollment options available. But most importantly, just get in touch and let's talk about how we can work together to provide your children with the best possible Catholic education. You can call me on my mobile phone directly at 980-699-5575, or you can email me at mail@classicalliberarts.com. Send me all of your questions. I'll answer every one. We can talk about all of the options that are available for your children, and we can give your children an elite historical Catholic education in the 21st century, right in the safety and comfort of your own home for a fraction of the cost of a modern private school. If you're interested, let's talk about it. Get in touch with me anytime, and we'll give your children an elite Catholic education. God bless.